All right. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Farragut Board of Zoning Appeals for the town of Farragut, of course, for November 28, 2018 at 7 p.m. Chair recognizes that initially, at least, there were 3 items on the agenda. The first item, and I'll take up the rest then with Mr. Shipley because I'm not quite sure about the numbering, but the first item was the approval of minutes for the October 24, 2018 meeting. Have all members of the board had an opportunity to review those minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Based on that, do we have any motions?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, call for any discussion. There's no discussion. Call for the question. All in favor, please affirm by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. The second item I have on the agenda, and Mr. Shipley, if you can help me understand this, I was having a little bit of difficulty. On the front of the agenda, I have 3 items, 1, 2, and 3, but when I get to...
It's off numbered.
It is
by
off
one.
numbered, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So am I correct in understanding that item number 2 then is the item number 3 in the back of the packet that
Yes.
says this request was withdrawn?
Yes, that's
All
right.
right. So I have 2 items. So the second item on the agenda is the public hearing on a request for a setback variance of 10 feet from the rear property line associated with an accessory building under construction at Concord United Methodist Church at 11020 Roan Drive, 12.13 acres, zoned R-2. Wade Reagan applicant. Is the applicant present? All right, good evening. All right, what we do customarily is we hear from the town's official telling us what their position is, and then we give you an opportunity to present information and to ask questions. So if we can, Mr. Shipley, what is the town's position?
And I apologize for that numbering. That was because the officers last month was an extra item, and I didn't adjust the recommendation. So that's, anyway, just as some background on this, the Concord United Methodist Church is actually situated within it's surrounded by the Thornton Heights subdivision, and it's all zoned R2, general single-family residential. In the town, most of our residential zoning districts allow churches and schools. It's just that because they have, those uses can have certain physical characteristics that would be very different from a residential use, like more people, more parking areas, lighting, noise, potential, that kind of stuff. Then they have specific development criteria in the zoning ordinance that deals with those type properties to really protect nearby residents is the objective there. So you typically will see a 25-foot planted buffer strip around the periphery of churches and schools in residential zoning districts. And then you'll have building and structure setbacks that would be greater than you would see for residential buildings and structures. So, for example, in the R2 zoning district, under the section that deals with churches and schools, the setback requirements for accessory structures would be 30 feet from the side and rear property line, whereas for residential use of property, it's only 5 feet typically from side and rear property line for accessory structures and buildings. So that's why there's a difference in the distance requirement, just to give you some background there. And actually for agricultural accessory structures and buildings, it's even a greater setback of 35 feet. And that's why the first item was withdrawn, because they were questioning an interpretation in the ordinance, but it actually would be less favorable for them, because if that was interpreted as an agricultural accessory structure, they would have to be 35 rather than 30 feet. So So basically, this situation, it came up, obviously, staff understands it was a very honest mistake. It was certainly nothing intentional. It was an Eagle Scout project, and basically, it's a storage shed, as I understand it, for materials and equipment that would be for the, they have a kind of a community garden on the western portion of the church property. And let me just see if I can get this pointer to work. So the community garden's in the western portion, and then basically the structure, this little storage shed, which is actually, I think it's 12 by 16, is in that general location there. So during construction, one of the building inspectors actually noticed that something was going on over there that looked like it might need a permit or approval. We had not been contacted prior to construction on this, so we didn't really know what was going on. So a meeting was set up on site on October 31st to look at what had happened, and that's when it was discovered that the building was a little under 200 square feet, so it wouldn't be held to building code requirements, but it would still have to meet any applicable zoning related requirements like the size of the building, the height, the setback, and those kind of things. So so the staff did some rough measurement in the field, and then we came back and looked at this drawing here, the plat, to see where the structure, was situated in relation to the nearest side or rear property line, and it was found to be roughly 20 feet at its nearest point. That's not counting the overhang, but from the corner of the building, roughly 20 feet. One thing to note is, if you'll notice, just to the immediate east of the storage shed is an existing one-story building that actually has been there for many years. It predates the requirements that are in place on the property now, and it's actually even closer to that property line than the storage shed. So my understanding from the applicant, and again, it clearly was an honest mistake, is that I guess their assumption was, and they can speak to this themselves, but since the existing building was where it is, they figured that when they were constructing the shed, since it would be slightly further away from the property line than where the existing building is, that it wouldn't be an issue in terms of setbacks, and that's an understandable position. And that's why they're requesting a variance at this time to allow the building to be left in its current configuration. Let's see if I've got a picture here of it. And let's see. That's the existing building, and I was talking about that's a little bit closer to that property line than the storage shed. And you can see the storage shed in relation to the existing building. It kind of has an offset, so it makes it a couple of feet further away from that property line. The property owner that owns the house lot nearest to this shed did come by the office and talk with me. She doesn't have any problems with what's happened there, although that is not typically relevant. I did want to mention that, since that was something that she did come by and have a conversation with me about that. Since there is room, to meet the setbacks in this area, and they, obviously should have verified the setbacks prior to construction with the town, there wouldn't be, from a staff's position, any grounds for a variance in this case. We do understand where they would believe that, building it in that location wouldn't be an issue because of the existing building's placement. But still, it is a new construction that would be held to the current setback requirements, at least from the staff's position. So Be happy to try to answer any questions if you have any. Yes, sir.
I have a question, or a statement, I guess. I'm trying to reconcile Exhibit C and the unlettered exhibit on the flip side of Exhibit E.
It's from the plat.
Exhibit C, the plat there, which I guess
Yes, sir.
is the
It's a more
official
accurate, yeah.
document.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Lot number 14, Williams. If you look at the right property line, and it goes north past the chain link fence,
Yes.
and then it crosses the property line, it looks to me like the new structure is on the completely on the right side of that property line, and it does not abut the Williams property. It's too far to the right. You see what I'm saying? That if you follow that line all the way.
Well, the nearest property line that's not part of the church, it may be a little bit unclear.
He's talking about this right here.
I think
The
this house
periphery,
doesn't exist.
that's the peripheral property line.
Right.
So
Yes.
the nearest, if you go to the nearest exterior property in relation to the storage shed, this is the closest one, lot number 14.
Right. But,
Straight line distance from closest point to closest point was roughly 20 feet.
Okay.
but what I'm saying is that it does not abut the 14, the Williams property. It's, the new storage shed is east of that property line.
Well, it's, you measure it from the nearest part of the structure to any nearest property line of the, I mean, it's not, that's not really, in terms of setbacks, you measure it from the closest point. Whether it's east of the eastern property line of the Williams, it's still within 30 feet of the rear property line, the side and rear property line of lot 14. So in other words, if you take an envelope of 30 feet, from the Williams property line, and you come out, whatever part of that structure is within that space is in violation of the setback, if that clarifies what you're trying to, because I'm not really sure I'm following what you're saying otherwise.
Well, and if I can, Mr. Shipley, what you're saying is, looking at Exhibit A, Appendix A zoning, Section 6, and it's subsection 3D2B, that all accessory structures excluding signs and fences shall be set back a minimum of 30 feet. Setback shall be measured from the nearest point of any property line. So what
Right.
you're saying is, that's the nearest point
Right, that's
of
right.
any property line.
That's correct.
All right.
That's right. Yes, sir.
Got any idea how far that is?
20 feet from the
20,
nearest part. That's not counting the overhang, which we don't count that as long as it's not more than 2 feet
Right, okay.
from
So
the,
that's approximately, what we're talking about then is marked on Exhibit C as, I read it as Tract 14, but it's the Williams tract, and I don't have directions, but I assume that's the northeast corner of the Williams tract?
yes,
All right.
it is.
So from the northeast corner, the structure that's been constructed is approximately 20 feet from that point of the northeast corner of the Williams tract.
Yeah, because
Okay.
that's the nearest part of the Williams tract to the structure. Yes, sir. That's right. The other building is approximately 18 feet to that same corner. So it's actually closer than the storage shed.
But that's the one that predates
Yes, sir.
this requirement.
That's right. That's right. This area doesn't have a buffer strip either through there. It's the churches, like a lot of churches, they've bought residential properties around them over time. So until they do some kind of, larger development that would go through the planning commission, in terms of requiring a fully planted buffer for some extremely minor project, it would be a little bit out of balance. But that may have to be planted at some point in the future, depending on what happens with the property.
Hey, Mark, just to clarify that on lot 43 and lot 13, those one-story frames don't exist anymore, correct?
Right. Yep, that's correct.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay.
You mean the house? No, in lot 14, the house is there.
I mean, I'm sorry, 13 and 43.
In 43. Yeah, those were houses, obviously, that were bought by the church and incorporated into their property. And most of that area is in the it's part of the community garden space.
Okay.
Yeah. You can see it here a little bit better on their aerial image. You can see the garden spaces in the south and in the northwest part of the site. It's a very nice community garden, by the way, if you haven't been out there. I would say that. It's very good, yes. Yeah, I might sneak over there someday. Yeah, it's really nice.
All right, does anyone else have any questions of Mr. Shipley, or can we move to hearing from the applicant at this point? All right, we'd certainly like to hear from you. If you will please take the podium, if you will state your name and residence address, and present any information that you'd like us to hear.
Yes, sir. My name is Wade Reagan. I live at 330 Rockwell Farm Lane. And I just want to say, we did look at how big the shed was and saw that it was under 200 square feet and that we would not need a permit for that. And then we believed that the code, the R2, that it would be a minimum of 5 feet setback for the Chapter 3, Section 6, D2C. It says, all accessory structures excluding fences shall be set back a minimum of 5 feet, except as provided for elsewhere in this ordinance or the Farragut Municipal Code. So we had a misunderstanding there. And then also in D3C, it says for the rear yard, it also says a minimum of 5 feet there. We believe that to be correct.
Mr. Reagan, I'll be the first to say that, we understand, and there's been no evidence presented contrary to that, that this is a good faith mistake. So no one thinks that the Eagle Scouts, or the Scouts or anyone else has done anything intentionally wrong. We have, unfortunately, people come before us sometimes that do things like this intentionally and then ask for forgiveness afterward. And we understand, or at least I do, that there's no evidence being presented that that's the case. So we appreciate the fact that you come here with a good spirit and are asking for a variance because of what appears to be an honest mistake. And so what the board has to wrestle with is, do we have the authority to do something like that, given the strict rules that we're supposed to apply? And if we did do something like that, who else is going to come to us afterwards and expect us to do the same thing when they probably didn't have a good faith mistake and they just did it, and they want us to do something else. So that's part of what the board has to wrestle with, is the strict application of what is seemingly a black and white rule, see if we have any way to deviate from that rule, and if we don't, decide whether we're going to follow the rule or not follow the rule, or have some justification for deviating from it. So nothing that we say tonight impugns your character or good deed or your work in any way, and we certainly appreciate you being here in good faith this evening.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Reagan, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
A thought. First of all, my son was an Eagle Scout, so I certainly understand what you went through to do this project, because I sort of had to go through it myself. So I'm just thinking outside the box for a minute to see if we can't come to some resolution. So, and this, part of this is a question to Mark. If the smaller building, the shed, were to be somehow incorporated into the larger building that's already there, would that satisfy the requirement?
Well, no, it wouldn't, because, I mean, it's still it's an addition constructed in that 30-foot space. So, you know, it really wouldn't change
Well, what I was
that.
thinking is that the I don't know what you call them, the 2x4s that hold up the roof are 16 inches apart. So it would not, for somebody that's got the right equipment and knows what they're doing, it
Yeah.
would not be a huge project to make a hole in that building and then make a hole in the larger building. And voila, you have one large building.
It really wouldn't change anything from the setback perspective. So, I mean, it'd be an unnecessary expense for them probably to do that. I mean, at least from the staff's perspective and our understanding of the ordinance and application of it, it wouldn't change that.
Mr. Shipley, if that occurred, again, referring back to Exhibit A, Section 6, subsection 3, D as in dog, 2A, if somehow that became part of the building rather than an accessory structure, doesn't that increase the minimum
Yeah.
setback to 50 feet rather than 30 feet?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that actually exacerbates the condition that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, well, it was a thought.
It's a good thought.
I thought of it myself too. To see, because I mean, honestly, when we were out there, I was obviously hoping that it wasn't an issue. Of course, you know, we didn't know for sure because we had to go back and look at the plat to see where the actual property line is. We assumed the fence was roughly where it was, but we wanted to double check, and unfortunately, you know, we found that it had been within the setbacks. So,
Mr. Reagan, I have a question. Tell me a little bit about the construction of this accessory structure. It looks like there, and again, I could be wrong, and so please correct me, but it looks like there are some brick pavers. I can't really tell if there's a concrete slab poured or not, and I can't really tell how the structure is sitting on the brick pavers or concrete slab. So I'm wondering if they're tied in, or if this is something that with the right equipment, you could lift up the accessory structure and move it back. What's going to be entailed or required to move the physical structure back 10 feet to be in compliance?
Yes, sir. We do have a concrete slab poured, and it is anchored in with the red head bolts. And it would most likely cost about the same as building the shed to rent the equipment and everything to pick it up and move it, and to pour the more concrete to put it on.
I imagine your troop is working on a limited budget for this project.
Yes, sir. I've already raised money for this building the shed.
Have the church go to it. Are the Williams, is that still the current property owners?
Miss Williams, yes.
Go to the Williams and purchase like whatever, 10 feet, is that what it's needed? Just a little corner there.
Well,
They do not? Okay.
sorry, what? Yeah, Miss Janice Williams, yes, sir. Yes, she came and talked to me about it.
Would that create a subdivision problem?
Well, I don't know. That's, you'd have to look and see whether it creates a lot that's less than 15,000 square feet, or it creates a setback issue for structures on her lot by moving the line. That's a possibility. I mean, that might be a possibility, but I don't know, that'd have to be something you'd look at. That may be more expensive than another
Yeah,
option,
I'm
but
just-
it's certainly something
I'm
to
just
think.
trying to think of options.
Yeah, we do that sometime. We do recommend that with, property lines, if you could, acquire a few feet one way or the other to address a situation like that. Oh, yeah.
Typically speaking, we can't answer questions, but we're happy to hear anything that anyone would like to present.
You just
What we
need to go
suggest
to
is
the
that-
podium.
Yeah, if Mr. Reagan will yield the podium, and if you will take the podium and identify yourself and your address, we'll be happy to hear from you. Or anyone. Sure. Do you have more? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stop you.
I think this is it for right now, but might have something else after they present their points.
Okay.
Mr. Shidley, can I ask you a question regarding when the church purchased Lot 3 and Lot 43 incorporated in their property, was that redesignated as one parcel of land that's owned by the church, or are Lot 3 and Lot 43 distinct parcels of land that are deeded separately?
They were all combined into the larger tract. Yeah. 13, 3, and 43, 12R. All those were originally house lots, and they were all. Concord Baptist has done that too with Bel Air, and a lot. This is not uncommon,
Okay.
for where you've got a large church that's surrounded by residential lots. That sometimes the church really has no other options when they're growing, than to buy up some of the adjacent house lots, and that's what's happened. It's a good thing for the church, that they are growing and need that land. But that is all one parcel.
Certainly happy to recognize you. If you'll please state your name and tell us where you live.
My name's Mike Smith, and I live at 1807 Nantasket Road, Knoxville. I am a member of Concord United Methodist Church, and in reference to the shed that we were building, we were trying to move it away from both properties so that we could have an access between the property 13 is a garden now and property 43 is a garden now. And we thought, again, mistakenly, that 20-something feet would be plenty of room for us to be able to move back and forth across, not in pairing with anybody else's properties or whatever the case may be. We did put the slab in. We got that donated for him free from Harrison Concrete. And so that's one of the reasons we put it down into the concrete, because we didn't want it to move. The first complaint was that it was attached to the original building, and that's what came to, I think I'm correct on that, came to the town of Farragut and said, that can't be. So we had already anticipated something like that, and that's the reason we put it back about 6 to 8 inches away from the original building. Other facts to that is that this is about the 10th, or Wade's is the 10th project that we've done with young adults. We've had Girl Scout Gold Awards, Eagle Scout Awards. An entire troop put a greenhouse up in honor of their troop leader. Cub Scouts wanted to get involved, so they built a table to put our sink on. And we just, anybody that wanted to come in and do something for the church and learn more about the gardens. We've done that for them. In the past 5 years, we have, as Mr. Shipley said, it's a beautiful garden. We've provided 29,000 pounds of fresh produce that we've given to local folks in 12 different places in the surrounding area. So that's a little bit of what we've done. We're just proud of Wade and what he's doing, and hopefully we can get this variance approved.
Thank you. Sir, I do have a question for you real quick.
Yes, sir.
A little bit of a hard question in that I would assume that Mr. Reagan was not the one sort of overseeing the mechanics of coordinating with the town to make sure everything was done properly. And so I'm trying to figure out, in terms of who was overseeing that and who was coordinating with the town and making sure that all requirements were met, who did that responsibility ultimately fall on?
You would have to blame me for that.
All right, well, I didn't want to point at you.
I am
but
one of the
I
co-chairs of the
did think-
garden committee.
All right, very good.
And as one of the co-chairs, we thought we were in compliance with everything, and especially since we did not attach the building, we kept it under the 200 square feet. We thought we were within code of everything. We didn't pay attention to a setback code.
I have a comment and a question. Comment is, I really appreciate what you all do for the young folks in Farragut and the amount of produce that you're providing to folks who need it. So I really, really appreciate that, and I think everyone here does. The question I have is, if this variance was not afforded to you all or approved, would you all lose the use of the land that you currently occupy?
Lose the land.
Would you not be able to use the property if we do not give you or do not approve the variance?
We wouldn't be able to use the shed because you would end up having to tear it down, from what I understand.
Would you be able to use the land, the parcels?
The parcel? Yeah, yes, we have 2 gardens growing right now,
Okay.
one on each side.
And they're fabulous. I'm jealous, truly.
You can come out and help us
I need
anytime.
to, actually. My father-in-law actually.
We take all hands.
My father-in-law is a retired professor of horticulture from UT, so we can use that as a concession.
And we have worked
So-
with UT. We've done trials with them for the past 2 years.
Fantastic. We need to keep Dad busy, so that's fantastic.
Yes.
Oh, very good. So, fantastic. Excellent, excellent program.
I have a question for Mr. Shipley. All right. Let's assume that the accessory structure is in violation and that it has to be either moved or removed. Does that mean that the slab and the surrounding brick pavers that are shown in the picture, and maybe I'm looking at that wrong, but it looks like there's a slab and surrounding brick pavers.
They're
Does
just
that
laid
mean
there.
that those have to be removed as well, or can those remain where they are because they're not an accessory structure, or are they also defined as an accessory structure?
No, they wouldn't be. They wouldn't have to be removed.
All right. So,
'Cause if you took that interpretation, a lot of their garden space would have to be
okay.
removed. And
All
you know,
right.
this is a structure with a roof over it. It's a more substantial, and it's part of the reason for setbacks is just the feeling of more space and light between, properties. And, when you go vertical and you enclose things, you start consuming space. And then that starts to affect what the intent of a setback is in the first place. Whereas a flat work like that is, doesn't consume any visual space. And, I wouldn't worry about that from the staff's perspective.
All right. So obviously, while completely not desirable, one potential solution, if the board found that it was not in compliance and needed to be removed to be in compliance, is the wood could be reclaimed. It could be stored until another slab could be constructed, and then once there were resources to construct the slab, as long as it was in compliance with the setback, you could put the wood back, hopefully, on a new slab, and what you have is an outside slab that you exit onto rather than exiting onto a smaller, slab there. So you have a prep area or something else, but it's not a complete loss from that
Right,
standpoint.
You could do that, yes.
We do have one problem with that. Wade only has 3 more months before he turns 18. And the
Surely-
scouts will not, yes.
Surely he's staying around and going to finish this project.
The scouts will not allow any variance on that for Eagle Awards.
The
You have
18.
to be 18 under.
So I want to clarify, I asked that question about how those lots were incorporated for a specific reason, and this is a real challenge, and I think this was brought up by the applicant. If you read under the R2 zoning district, under paragraph D, subparagraph 3C, you probably don't have this in the packet, for a rear yard setback, all accessory structures excluding fences shall be set back a minimum of 5 feet except as provided elsewhere in the ordinance. My challenge is, yes, the church owns this property, but the church isn't on this particular parcel of the property. And so, it's a little challenging to sit here and say, well, because the church is over here 300 feet to the right and we happen to have a garden here, this all of a sudden has to have a 20-foot setback because it's church property. I'm not sure that that's just. I'm not sure that this board, how that sways and how we would fit. But let's say the church decided on Lot 3 that they wanted to build a parsonage there for the pastor to live in. They could do that, and then lo and behold, this shed as it stands now would be in compliance with the setback requirement for that particular parcel. So that's why I asked that question earlier.
Well, they'd have to, yeah, they probably would have to put it on its own house lot, though, to do
Correct.
that. Yes.
And so I think that's a challenge in the ordinance. And
Well, what we came in to realize with that, where you're going with that, was the only other thing you could possibly interpret that as is an agricultural accessory structure, and that has even a greater setback than the church or school. So,
and I think that would be a point that would be argued. Is it agricultural or is it an accessory? I would not think a one-story, if you put a barn there, 2-story barn with a hayloft, I would say that's definitely an agricultural structure. I could interpret that what is built there is an accessory structure on a piece of property, particularly if there's a house. The fact that there is maybe a garden around it, one might lean one more to say it's more agricultural, but they could take the garden out and leave that open field and it wouldn't be. So I just bring that to the board's attention because I'm a little dismayed. I mean, understanding what our requirements are, I'm a little dismayed that because the lots were incorporated into one and the church is sitting over there, this all of a sudden changes the setback from 5 feet to 20 feet for an accessory structure. That just is a challenge for me, and it may be something that we need to send back to the planning commission to look at. Is there any way to do a text amendment or change language to make some allowance for that in a situation like this? That may be too complicated, but that's not what we're here for. That's the planning commission.
Yeah, I mean, that's
board right
always
now.
an option, a text amendment, but then again, he's got the 3-month time
Right.
frame, and that's about how long it takes to go through a text. And there's no guarantee that they would change it anyway. I mean, I don't have any idea. We'd have to look at the specifics of it. We have to consider not just this situation and this property, but, what if somebody wanted to do that somewhere else in the town where there may be neighbors that would be adamantly opposed to that? And I know of a couple of places where that would fall into place. So you have to kind of watch that kind of stuff because you don't want to set a precedent.
Do you charge anybody for any of the produce, or is it 100% all donated?
It is, the community part of the garden is 100% given away. If you adopt a bed or a row, you provide us with a tithe of 10% and give us 10 hours in the garden to help us with hands working. So no money goes to, no, we do not charge any money for the places that we're giving away. Homeless vets are getting it, Farragut, Faith Lutheran's getting it. We're giving it to 12 different locations. and it's all been
Ones
free.
who work in garden are not just church members, they're from the community. So.
Yeah, we have master gardeners all over.
The church garden is a community garden, and that's how it is perceived by those who work there, those who receive the produce.
Mark, one more question, and again, I'm just looking for answers here. Would it make a difference if that parcel was leased by an entity from the church? Would that make a difference?
No, not because it's measured from the property line, so we can't really, you'd have to change the language of how you measure if you wanted to do that. So it really wouldn't. Because leases can change, as you well know, and, it's, property owners can change. I think, to me, the thing the argument that I think they could make, is that there's an existing building that's actually closer to the property line in question than what they've added. And that's obviously why they thought they were okay with the setbacks, and that's understandable. I understand that. But they do have the physical space to have built it to the north and have it clear of the 30-foot. And that's kind of where the staff was coming from on that.
Does the board have any further questions of Mr. Shipley, the applicant, or anyone else?
I have one more question for Mr. Shipley. So, under Section 2 of Chapter 4, Administration and Enforcement, subparagraph C, which is the Farragut Board of Zoning Appeals, subparagraph 3 under there says, where there is practical difficulty and unnecessary hardship in carrying out the strict letter of this ordinance, the Board of Zoning Appeals shall have power in passing upon appeals to authorize such a variance from the terms of this ordinance as will not be contrary to the public interest as defined under the variances of this section. And obviously, this is not in compliance with the setback because this is a church property. So the other question I guess I would have is, from the town's perspective, if this variance was approved, how would that be contrary to the public interest as defined under the variances in the section?
Well, that's ultimately your all's decision to make. That's why it's before you all instead of the staff making the decision. I think we always have to look back at what would be the impact potentially on other properties in the town. If you had similar situations, we always have to consider that, at least from the staff's perspective. But if you all feel that what they're requesting is in keeping with the language of our zoning ordinance and your all's, powers and what you can do and grant under your authority, then that's your all's decision. I can't really help you with that. We just have to look and all I do is try to be consistent. And if you're going to not be consistent on something, you need to have good reasons for it that you would not find in other locations, so that you can justify this situation as being unique and something that is not going to, you're not going to find it, in some other property where this could come up.
So this question could be for Mark or anybody else on the board. But for the couple of years I've spent on the Board of Zoning Appeals, the premise that I've made my decisions on was basically the variance is necessary in order for the property owner to be able to use their property as it was intended. Mm-hmm. And so I'm having a hard time reconciling the fact that a variance is necessary in order for you all to still have the community garden and to use the existing structure, not the new one, but obviously the existing, because I believe that is the code that we have to operate under, but I'm open for other board members to correct me. So I guess my question is, the premise for our granting a variance is based on the fact that if the variance is not granted, the property owner cannot use the property for its intended use. Is that correct?
Is denied a reasonable use of the property?
I just don't have the code in front of me.
That
So
has been a position, certainly, that we've, in a
No, we would not be able to use it. I mean, we would have to take it down.
yeah, and when I say property, I'm talking about the entire land parcel.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
not
Yeah.
the building, but
Yeah.
the entire
The entire,
garden.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only reason we're doing this is we want another place to store more equipment.
It would have an impact because of people's ability to actually do the gardening in that portion on that lot, because they don't have the equipment and the tools that they need to do it. So the volunteers would probably diminish, or their hours, and then the produce would diminish. So it would have an impact. It would not cut it down to zero, but it would have an impact of diminishing productivity and the number of workers.
And as Pam is saying, the reason we did it, we have the shed that's on that first property. It's full, for one, but we also are trying to travel back and forth 150 feet to get from one end to the other end. And so we decided another nice Eagle project would be to have a shed.
Very logical.
And Wade came to us and said, I need an Eagle project.
So from my perspective, I agree with, the way we've operated that is the standard. I mean, under paragraph 4 here, requirements for granting a variance, subparagraph B there says the little enforcement of the ordinance would deprive the applicant of any reasonable use of his land, and that is always the standard we've used. I just see that in my comments are more of, I think I probably see this the same way you do. At the same time, I just want to point out that this situation is very unique, and I think it's very unjust, in the fact that had they not incorporated these, had they just bought the parcel and left it as a single-family lot, we wouldn't be here. We would have a 5-foot setback. We can't rectify that probably this evening in this meeting, but I want the town to be aware that I think that in this situation, that's not just, and the fact that the town should probably look at that going forward to say, is there a way that we can address a situation like that through a text amendment or modifying the ordinance for future situations. But I agree, the comment of, if there's a reasonable use, then obviously we don't grant the variance of the land. So that's my read as well.
Well, and to that point, I mean, the thing that is most concerning is that if this were a single-family dwelling lot, there'd be a different requirement than if it's a church, than if it's for agricultural use. And none of us wrote that rule, and none of us know why they wrote that. I don't know why they wrote that rule. I have to assume that there's some reason they did, but we have no idea why they wrote these rules. We can sort of guess, but, for some reason, someone in their wisdom decided to place more of a requirement on churches than single-family dwellings. I don't know what that is, but, I struggle with the fact that I want you to accomplish your Eagle Scout goal. I think this is a benevolent use of the property that benefits the community and not just a religious institution, but all of us. And I want to be able to find a way around this ordinance, but at the end of the day, I am supposed to apply the ordinances as they're written. And so unless I have a compelling reason, or at least a reason, that I can articulate to ignore what is sort of a black and white rule, I always find myself constrained. And so if this structure were not there, the property would still be used the way it was being used before the structure was built. No doubt the structure was built to enhance the property and its use for this purpose, but it's not denying it a reasonable use of the property, certainly in the way it was being used. And so I am left, unfortunately, not having a way around this particular ordinance, and I just want you to know it's nothing that you've done, it's because of the way the thing's written that I feel as though I'm being constrained. And so I may be wrong, but, I want to find a way around this, and I'm not finding it.
Can I say a word, Regis?
Sure, absolutely. If you please state your name and state your residence, please.
Chris Reagan, share the same residence with Wade Reagan, 330 Rockwell Farm. I know Mr. Shipley, he's got a couple of nephews that were both Eagle Scouts. Mr. Holliday said he's got a son, who's an Eagle Scout. You know the amount of hours that goes into this, the planning. I made a big mistake thinking this was a weekend project. No. I spent a lot of hours with Wade, and so is this group here, starting from scratch with a concrete pad, anchoring in the concrete, backing up a few steps, watching Wade raise the money. He had to submit it to his Boy Scout leaders, to the council, getting all that approved. He thought he was going down the right path. And I do think that is, it's going to be for a really good use. It'll be there for a long time. I know there was an issue. You brought up, public opinion. They're going to have an issue. Miss Janice Williams, she and her husband both drove to the site, walked it with us. They were very open, very understanding. That was not going to create an issue with them. They are the ones that are closest. I think she said she was willing to do whatever, write a letter, even met with Mr. Shipley to make sure everything was good there. So hopefully we take that into account. And then, we kind of talked about it again, I think Mr. Wilson brought up the Chapter 3, Section 6, the General Family Residential District. That can be a little confusing if you're a 17-year-old trying to look through that, because you've got the multi-use with the ag, the church, and the residential. But if you do look at it, Section 6D regulations, side yard, under R2, it's 5 feet for a side yard, and it could, accessory structure could be 5 feet for the rear yard, one way you look at it. So I think it's a tough way to have different interpretations on that. But I hope we look as a whole, as a group, and see the good this garden's going to do, and the work that Wade's put into it, and take that into account too.
Thank you very
All
much.
right, thank you.
So I guess the question, and I'm leaning towards if we were to have a text amendment, and I look at the 4 criteria under the requirements for granting and what the applicant requesting is supposed to show. So there's A, B, C, and D. So A is the granting of the permit will not be contrary to the public interest. In my mind, I think, short of letter B, I think granting a variance in this case would not be contrary to the public interest in weighing things out. I think the challenge becomes subparagraph B under there says the literal enforcement of the ordinance would deprive the applicant of any reasonable use of his land. And I think the word any is what is the challenge, and whether that's the correct standard, the town, that's the standard we have to apply at this point. But I think that's where the town considering a text amendment to modify that one word to, from any reasonable to a reasonable use in a situation like this might be a little clearer. But at this point, I agree with the chairman. I don't see how we get around, as much as we would all like to, granting a variance where we would step out of our standard of how we make decisions at this board. We would lose credibility and not be able to defend ourselves in a case where, we had a similar situation. And so that's, I want you to understand that this is a real challenge for us, and at least for me. And it's why I've looked through all parts of this ordinance to try to figure a way to grant this variance. And so that's the only thing that I can see as a remedy at this point is
It's a text.
to do a text amendment, particularly to that subparagraph B under paragraph 4, requirements for granting a variance. That would be the only thing. If that was out, I think then we could have a further discussion. But at this point, in my opinion, the hands are tied for me to vote in favor of a variance.
Mark, I should know the answer to this question, but I don't. So the text amendment would go through the planning commission, and it has to go through a couple readings, and then come up to the board of mayor and aldermen for final. And there's 2 readings there as well.
It'd be, go to the planning commission, but potentially in January.
We don't have, I'm sorry, we don't have that time for him to be able to get his Eagle Award. I mean, you're talking probably 5 months out. 2 more meetings, 3 more meetings, he said. So that's 3 months right there. And the 5, till the aldermen look at it, discuss it as we were discussing it tonight, you could possibly be talking 5, 6 months from now, which would shamefully take away his Eagle. No.
Mark, have you seen that time frame be 5 to 6 months? You
No,
said 5
something
to
like
6,
that.
right?
Now, I don't, again, this is, we're assuming something will be approved or changed. So the powers that be have to look at, when you change an ordinance language, we don't take that lightly. We're going to have to think about what the implications would be anywhere in the town where that could apply. Maybe it's fine. I mean, I'm not sure if under this requirements for granting a variance, it doesn't say they have to meet all 4 standards. It just says before the board shall have the authority to grant a variance, the person claiming the variance has the burden of showing those 4 things that you're talking about, Michael.
Well, and another, again, you're talking about moving a point on the Williams property. So in terms of moving that northeast point, even if there wasn't time to go through a procedure that may or may not be successful with the planning commission, if you were going to convince Miss Williams, I understand it, that this is something that she wants to do, you're talking about moving that point 10 feet away, so that, you've got to move all points on the Williams property 10 feet away. So I don't know which point is, I assume the northeast corner is closest. Yeah, just the closest.
Just that little
Yeah,
area.
so if you cut out 10 feet square, and again, it's a
don't know
matter
if
of
that's- yeah.
whether or not you
You'd have
can
to have a
legally
plat and all that.
subdivide, a subdivision plat like that without running afoul of a re-subdivision requirement or something like that. But certainly that could be considered. Again, unfortunately, this board, we're not charged with coming up with the best solution, but we all actually want a solution, I believe, to this. And so we're trying to think of other things where we could direct you without having any power or authority to do so.
I think the thing that they could say is unique to this situation is that there is an existing structure that is closer to that setback than what they've built. That is somewhat unique.
I was going to ask you, because you made a comment earlier, you thought that there might be other situations that, or circumstances where the applicant could kind of make the same argument. I'm probably not paraphrasing you correctly, but do you remember, or can you share of any circumstances where there is a structure already outside, doesn't meet the variance, or doesn't meet the setback, and if we granted this, would it cause more issues because the existing building does not currently meet the setback
I
requirement?
don't know of any that, I'm sure there could be some, but this would be in relation to somebody having new construction. There
It's
may
still
be
the
a
construction,
property
okay.
owner, like you could have a Williams property owner that has, for some reason, doesn't like the church. I'm hypothetical here.
Sure.
And anything that they would do out there, they would come in and research whether that is compliant or not, and find out that it's not, and they would be adamantly opposed to. Now, it's not the case here, obviously, because Ms. Williams is fine with it, and based on my conversation with her. But that could happen in another setting, another part of the town, and that's the kind of thing we have to think about. You know, but you do have an existing building that's at least 2 feet closer to her property line. That's a more substantial building than what they've built.
But that predates these
It
requirements.
does, yes.
And it doesn't give us an exception.
No, I'm just trying to look for ways of arguing this myself. Because like they said, I have 2 nephews that are Eagle Scouts as well.
yeah.
So none of us want to have this we always, it wasn't an issue, it wasn't here, but, it's,
Sure.
yeah.
May I ask one more question? We talked about this earlier, but why does the 5 foot not apply here?
Well, that's for a residential use of the property, like a house lot. Because, again, this property, as I mentioned when I introduced this, is typically when you have a non-residential use that's in a residential zoning district, you can have activities on that non-residential property that could cause issues with the surrounding residents. So that's why there's greater setbacks for structures and buildings. There's, typically a buffer strip. Like I said, actually, this property would be required to have a 25-foot wide planted buffer strip if they ever did any substantial, development or redevelopment in that part of the property. But, since it's a community garden, that's almost kind of like a buffer strip in and of itself, because it's a natural space that, you don't have anything in there that should be harmful to surrounding residents. So that's why there's a difference.
One more question, Mark. If this structure was on wheels, how far would it have to move back to be in
Well, it
compliance?
appears to be 10 feet into the setback. So it's about 20 feet, and it has to be 30 feet.
Okay.
Yep.
So how long is the building?
It's 12 by 16.
16. So that's more than half of it. All right. Another one of my brilliant ideas up in smoke. I was thinking about just removing, remove the first so many feet, but 10 feet may be a bit much. Or not. I mean, that's something to think about.
Well, and part of the difficulty is that the testimony before this board, at least this evening, is that these lots, as they were acquired by the church, have been combined as one parcel. And so, if the church, and I have absolutely no idea what would happen, but if the church wanted to make Lot 3 back into residential, and of course I think of insurance issues and all sorts of other issues, then if Lot 3 were residential, would that change it?
Well, I mean, it looks like it'd be right on the property line of the old Lot 3. I'm just looking at
The
this.
challenge between lot 3 and lot 43.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's the property,
Then
it's,
you need a variance for that lot line.
that line is,
Unless you combine
that
that
would be
into one residential lot, 3 and 43 into one lot, but again.
but all those things are
Yeah.
probably more expensive and
A lot of
certainly
money.
more time consuming than any, other options, I think, because you'd have to plat that. And I don't know. That would-
How feasible would it be to take 10 feet off of one end and keep your material and then just put it on the other end? I'm not a carpenter, so I don't know, but
I don't really think that would work very well. We do have our other wall on the other side. We'd have to remove that, and that'd basically almost be just removing most of the shed anyways. Almost be the same as just taking the whole thing down. Yeah, we have the shingles on the roof too. We already laid all that out.
And there's no cement past that, there's no slab past that.
You need 10 more
Right.
feet of
We'd have to
slab.
put the slab 10
Yeah, but you don't need that right away. I mean, you don't need that immediately. You could do that whenever.
That's true. Could be a different person.
Yeah, start with gravel, with footers. I mean, you could theoretically, expand and have two different sides of stuff and accomplish a project, but just more limited in scope. Yes, absolutely. Please, if you please state your name and your residence.
Yes, sir. My name is John Randall, and I live at 10625 Summit Mountain Court in Knox County. I have been a participant with the community garden now for 3 years and have thoroughly enjoyed getting my hands dirty. And I really enjoy seeing the produce that we are producing make a difference in people's lives. One of the things that, as a participant, I had the opportunity to, make some observations as we went through this. And the first thing I'd like to observe is that we are here today to ask for a variance because we've been told that a variance was necessary. And I appreciate Mr. Shipley and his comments and the work that he's done in analyzing the situation. But from the get-go, our view has been that this is a residential effort. Okay, these are residential lots. The church may have bought them, but as far as I'm aware, there has been no use on review or anything of that nature changing them from residential lots, that's lot 43 and lot 13, to some other use. Consequently, the paragraphs that Wade and his father have brought forward about the five-foot setbacks seem to be what would be appropriate. In fact, if you look at Exhibit C, you will find that the adjacent lots all have accessory structures, and they do not even meet the 5-foot setback. So it seems very strange that we would take Lot 43, which no longer has a house on it, and apply different criteria to it than is being applied to the Cook lot, or the Copeland lot, and or the Williams lot, because they all have accessory structures, and they are closer than the 5-foot setback required. So, again, it was an innocent, good faith effort on our part, looking at these as being residential lots without any knowledge of any formal action to change their use. And residential is, in fact, one of the uses that's defined under the R2 category. We felt that it'd be appropriate to go ahead and use a 5-foot setback. So please take that into consideration. We're asking for a variance because we've been told that a variance is needed, but I would question whether or not a variance is needed if these are, in fact, residential lots that happen to be owned by a corporation that happens to be a church. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Can I make one more comment to that?
Certainly, yes. If you please identify yourself and your residence address.
My name is Gil Saladay. I live at 1335 Level Crossing Way. To tie on to what John was saying, wouldn't the town have the burden of replatting that if they were going to take the position that this was considered part of the church and that plat should show a setback? Typical subdivisions, my subdivision has on my survey a setback drawn on it. It's not up for discussion or interpretation. And when these lots were assembled into the church lot, doesn't the town have an obligation to pass that zoning requirement onto that land so the property owner knows what he's working under, where we all thought we were under R5, 5-foot setbacks. So that would be the position I would like to put in front of this board, because I still think that it's still R2 residential use. The church is not building any particular church facility on that. It's not going to serve the church itself. It is a separate community project. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shipley, what about that? Tell us why this board should consider these previously subdivided residential lots as a church under the ordinance as compared to a residential lot. What is
Well, I
the
mean,
town's rationale?
It's been combined with the church property, so it's,
The tax
it's
differently?
not a residential lot anymore. There's not a single-family house on the lot. There's not a residential use of the lot itself, just the lot.
Is a church zoned differently than a residence?
No, it's zoned R2. That's, I mentioned earlier, we have that fairly common, actually. A lot of churches and schools are zoned residential. Knox County schools are in residential zoning districts. And there's actually a plat note on the plat about the setbacks. It talks about 50 feet from front, side, and rear. That's talking about building setbacks. We talked about that earlier, and it also mentions 25-foot buffer strip on all side and rear property lines.
Well, and in looking at Exhibit A, I mean, the title of Section 6, General Single Family Residential District, in parentheses R2,
Yeah.
is what we're talking about, and in that, it's talking about churches. So it appears to talk
Yeah.
about the residential district R2 as being distinguished if there is a school, public or private, and churches. Does it define church anywhere?
I'm not sure if it's defined in the zoning ordinance. It would just have the typical Webster's dictionary
Sure.
definition.
Yeah, absent a specific,
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's defined or not.
It's not defined.
okay.
It's one of those that really doesn't need to be defined.
Well, and when the lots were combined, there's a corporate entity that owns them. That's a religious corporate entity. Is that correct? All right.
Setback should be stated on the drawing. That's easement, 15-foot utility easement's labeled. Setback should be labeled if it's anything different than the standard 5-foot.
It's in the plat
Some of
notes.
that.
It's in the plat notes. That's what I was talking about.
In each plat of each parcel or just the original church parcel?
The plat note for the church plat, the whole, yeah. That's pretty standard, is having the plat notes on there.
So it is noted on the plat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the setback. I was talking about that earlier about the 50-foot, and then the buffer strip is noted. They're both in plat notes on this particular plat, because when those lots were changed from residential to non-residential, that 25-foot buffer around the periphery, technically around, really it should, per the code, it should be, all around this. There should be a 25-foot buffer strip along that area. But certainly, since it's a community garden, and we're not concerned about that, because it's not the intent of having the buffer is not being lessened by how they're using that portion of the property currently. Now, if they were to put a parking lot out there, or a new church building or something like that, then that could be a situation where when they come to the planning commission, they'd have to go ahead and plant that required buffer strip.
One last question. I see on TV that a moving company will come in and they will move a 5,000 square foot house miles down the road. I got to believe there's some way to pick that building up and move it 10 feet or whatever the feet is. I mean, and again, where there's a will, there's a way. You got to be creative and think outside the box, and how can we do this? But I mean, if they can move a giant building, why can't a shed be moved? That's where I'm
It
struggling.
costs more to build to move it than it does to move it.
Really?
It also would fall apart because when you move a house, it's connected to the subflooring. This shed is not connected to the subfloor, which is the concrete pad. So if you pick up
Right.
the walls, then the walls will just come apart.
Well, if you pick all the walls up simultaneously, they jack up the walls. And if you do that simultaneously, I mean, that ought to work.
Right, there's no subfloor to hold the sides together.
Yeah, that,
It's like having cross braces that don't exist. In a house, you have those cross braces, which are the subfloor of the floor joists. I'm Pam Arnett.
Yes, I'm sorry. If you would.
Well, I
please-
jumped in with his comment, and I apologize
That's okay. If we
without
could get you to-
my formal introduction. I live at 10211 Thimblefields Drive in Knox County.
Thank you.
And I sat here for the first 45 minutes trying to figure out why this did not meet the 5-foot setback variance. And I'm still really confused about that, especially even maybe more so with the comments that have just come out in the past 15 minutes. And Mr. Wilson addressed it a little while even prior to that, why it is not, since it is not a church building on it, it's not a barn on it, an agricultural building, why is it not residential? If it's not, because there's not a house sitting on it, then maybe there's that fourth miscellaneous category that is not addressed. And so the application would be, it is more residential than it is agriculture or church. I used to work with a builder, and so my interpretation of reading this for his purposes to build would have been exactly how it was interpreted by Mr. Reagan, that a 5-foot setback would be adequate. So I'm still wondering why it doesn't fit in that.
Have you seen the plat to which Mr. Shipley referred?
Yes, I've been looking at it since we've been here. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I don't.
Oh.
I don't think so. Is that the plat that you're talking about, Mr. Shipley, that shows all the setbacks when the church combined the properties?
Oh, not that one, no, I'm sorry.
Notes about the 50-foot.
Yeah, the other setbacks that you
Yeah,
were
no, I didn't have
referencing.
any preliminary
No,
documents.
Okay.
Yeah,
so.
it's-
Can I see that? Would you mind if could I see it too?
But the basic question of why this is not being
plat predates
considered
me,
for,
by the
as a, meeting the 5-foot variance.
Which is bought a year ago, if it predates you, it certainly predates that plat.
That plat's been recorded for a long time.
Yeah, so this property wasn't even on that plat.
Okay.
And so, Mr. Shipley, in the ownership and reference here, the lots are still referenced as 1, 3, 12R, 13, and 43, trustees of Concord United Methodist, and then the street address. And so, again, that addresses my concerns if these are all still considered or referenced as individual lots.
No, they're not. That's why there's the parentheses around them. That's their old lot delineation. Yeah, I may have to come over.
Okay, I see what you're saying, because under its total lot area, one lot, 321,828 square
Yeah,
feet.
it's all combined. So the way we delineate old lots is you put the
Is the circle,
around
dotted
it.
circle.
Yeah. So all those, and then you can see the solid line indicates active current residential lots. So these have all been physically combined together. That particular plat was, that was recorded in 2003.
Mr. Chairman, if the name on the deed of the property, does that determine the use of the property? I don't think it does. Just because a church owns the property doesn't mean it's being used for church use. If a company owns the property, that doesn't make it a commercial property.
I certainly understand what you're saying.
So I think it's a gray area of interpretation that you could validate interpreting as a residential property with a 5-foot setback.
Sure,
Setback.
but the ordinance we're looking at is Exhibit A, and Section 6 talks about general single-family residential district R2. And so, even under this ordinance, it's contemplated that a church would be in a single-family residential district. So no one's saying that it's not in a single-family residential district. So the characterization of the property as church property would have to, I mean, It's somewhat
The
the
residential, then it's 5 feet.
That's just because,
It only goes to 20, 30 feet if it's used as church.
and that's only because of the name on the deed.
well, the testimony that we have that it's owned and maintained by the church. I would assume that it's got property.
No, it's not maintained by the church. It's maintained by volunteers.
Okay, it doesn't have insurance. It's not insured by the church.
I don't know.
On premises liability insurance.
So if somebody gets hurt gardening,
Sure.
They have not asked us.
If you say anything, you really do need to come to the microphone because this is all
sorry.
taped, so that you won't be heard otherwise. Sorry.
thank you, thank you.
No problem. We have worked independently of the church, but under the church guidelines as trustees. If we wanted to do something, like when we decided we wanted to start the gardens, we went to the trustees and said, here's what we would like to do. May we do it? Do you have any problem with da-da-da-da? Go for it was the answer, and they have not bothered us with anything since, other than we will ask them whenever we're going to get ready to do something major. And we didn't consider this at that point in time as a major because we saw it as an Eagle Scout project. And again, asking forgiveness for something that I didn't go and look and see that there was a 25-foot setback, thinking R2 was a 5-foot setback.
Do you pay rent, or does somebody compensate the church for the use of that property?
No. No, sir. No, sir. I mean, we don't pay the church, and we don't sell any of the produce. It's all volunteer work by the entire group.
So if the church said, we're going to build a school here, or we're going to expand,
Then we would have to leave. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Then the property would change use. That's part of what the whole zoning is for. It's to identify the use of a piece of property. Just because a church owns parcels of land everywhere, if it's being used as a home, like it was 5 years ago when there was a home there, there's not a home there now, but it's still, I would think it would be considered by the town as a residential use. It's not a church use, and each parcel is looked at that way, and it should be.
Well, and I understand your argument, but I'm looking at Exhibit F, which is the application that was filed by the applicant. And the applicant says his name is Wade Reagan on behalf of Concord United Methodist, and the description of the property and the name of the owner is Concord United Methodist. So the evidence before this board, as much as I'd like to parse it and say it's residential, is that it's church property.
It is church property, but the use of that property is not
Well,
church use. It's residential use, according to Mr. Shipley.
At the discretion of the church.
At the discretion of the person that owns the property, which is the church.
Exactly right.
What if it was owned by ABC Corporation? What would you call it?
I mean, that would be a different issue.
I mean, I wouldn't consider it residential because residential use is somebody's got a house and they've got a garage. I mean, to
I
me,
think
it's
that's the
pretty,
definition of a residential
it's pretty clear.
use,
to me
right? There has
that
to be a single
you'd have to
family
have-
dwelling,
yeah,
and there
I
has to
mean,
be
you'd
a
have to
garage.
have a dwelling.
So
yeah, 'cause
I think
that's
it's
a
clear, I
residence.
guess, in my mind, that this is not being used as residential
No,
because there's no
no.
single house.
I wouldn't
In some ways,
interpret that.
I could even see it being used as agriculture, which makes it
That'd be closer, but that's a worse.
But that's a
setback
worse
for
scenario, so I
actually
think
a
we're trying to
greater
be
setback, yeah.
generous by finding the zoning that
Yeah.
is as close to appropriate as
Right.
possible.
Mark, can I ask a question?
Yep.
When the property was re-subdivided and the interior lot lines combined, was there a reason why the buffer strip wasn't required at that time?
I don't remember. That's back in 2003, and I was not directly over that. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't personally require it now because I think that would be an unnecessary burden on the church to plant that for no real logical reason because you have a garden there. But I do think if they were to come in and add lights in a parking lot or something that could be an issue with the residents that they would have to go ahead and plant that buffer strip. And the town I would recommend they would do that. But as it's being used right now in the western part of that, it's kind of almost, like you say, an agricultural use more so than
Residential.
anything else.
Yes. Chair
Mr.
recognizes
Chair.
you again.
So what you're saying is we cut 10 foot off, because we're at 20 feet. If we'd cut 10 foot off of that building, we'd be in compliance.
That is my understanding.
Yeah, 30 feet's the
So we'd have a
setback.
2 foot by 16, whatever it is. I forgot now, let's see. It was 12 by 16, so it would be
12 by 6.
12 by 6.
That is correct. And again, that's not our determination, but we're hearing evidence from Mr. Shipley that that would be in compliance and be a non-issue.
Just 30 feet, right, yeah, whatever that.
30 feet now or 25 feet?
30 feet is a setback for accessory structures. The buffer strip's 25 feet. That's what,
It's at 20, it needs to be at 30.
yes, yes, that's right. And their request was correct. It's a 10-foot setback variance request, and that's right.
So you would have a short building, Wade gets his eagle, and away we go.
That seems like if the board is that adamant that they can't come up with that extra 10 foot, I mean, that's the only thing that we see, is we cut off 10 foot. Then you have a slab, and by the way, those pavers are just laid in there. We just put those in to keep the grass from growing. Sure. So that's nothing with that structure. It is the slab that's there that we worked with.
Mr. Mayor, if you would identify yourself and tell us where you live so we can come see you.
Okay, Ron Williams, 449 Sugarwood Drive. I've observed this for quite some time. You guys, you've got it right. What I see is they're saying, take 10 foot off, make it compliant, go ahead and put the side back on, that way he gets his Eagle Scout. And at some point in time later, you could pour more concrete and build onto the rest of it, just open that wall up and build it another, ever how many feet that you want to build it. That would be somebody else's Eagle Scout job there. But that would allow you to get his Eagle Scout. If you close that wall off, it wouldn't be a very big building, but it would be a building. And then at a later date, you could go ahead and go back and put more concrete in, another 10 feet, and then add on that 10 feet onto the other end of the building. That way your building don't fall apart by trying to move it, and you would be able to, I think, get by with what you need to here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I ask Wade a question with, I'm not a scout, I was never an Eagle Scout, and so I'm not familiar with that process. You've built the structure, you have pictures of the structure. I don't know if there's some requirement that the structure has to stand for so long in its given state at certain dimensions is built to qualify. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but I really don't know. And so obviously we've gone through a long proceeding here. This is an honest mistake that was made. And so you would have, actually you could watch the whole video of this and present it on the challenges that were faced, with trying to get the variance. As well, I don't know if the town would normally provide a copy of the minutes after they're approved.
It is taped, the whole tape.
That's public record, so you have that, and I don't know how that would work, to help support what you've done to this point with Boy Scouts of America to justify granting you the Eagle Scout, even though there was a legitimate error here. And I think that even coming before this board speaks testimony to your willingness to come and defend what you've done and quite honestly to own up that there was a mistake made. I think that speaks volume to your character, and that would be the character that they're looking to an Eagle Scout to have. So as much as this is a challenge for us to talk through this and not to be able to find a resolution. I don't know if the fruits of this is something you can use to present the Boy Scouts of America, and whether removing 10 feet, does that, void the project? I simply don't know, but that, I just wanted to put that out there as something to think about, because you have displayed a great deal of character coming before this board and discussing how you got to the decision you made. And I commend you for that. I just don't know what the Boy Scouts rules are, so I leave that with you.
And Mr. Chairman, one
Yes,
more
sir.
time. Again, it was not his mistake. It was my mistake. It falls not on him as far as that goes. I'm the one to blame, not coming to the town to check to see how far it was, assuming, and that, everybody knows what that means. How long will we have to tear down the 10 feet or cut off the 10 feet? Or can he go and get his equal award and then we tear it down? Do we have 10 days, 60 days, 12 days?
Would work with, from my perspective, the town would work with him on the timing if that's an option, certainly. I mean, it's not a problem.
This board has no authority, but Mr. Shipley is saying he would work with him.
Yeah.
So can he put a door on there and show that it is closed up, that it is a complete building, go to his scout leaders and present his project?
That we probably would just need something in writing that as of a certain date, this will be brought into compliance with the setbacks. But
2025,
certainly,
no.
I have no problem working with him on that, so he can get his Eagle Scout. That's not a problem at all from my perspective, and I'm over the building codes department, so
We're not going to
hopefully
tell anyone.
I mean, it is going to be brought into compliance is the ultimate, factor here, but it's a matter of timing and working with him so he can get that, finished. And
Is there a timeline for your presentation for the Eagle Scout Award?
I'm not sure if there's a timeline for when I have to present my thing. I just know I have to have enough time to finish my write-up, and I do have to do the presentation, and then I have to go through the meetings of board review and Scoutmaster Conference and those things.
So earlier there was a discussion about a timeline based on your 18th birthday. So I'm just trying to get a timeline maybe for the town so they understand
They have to be done
by
by March.
March. So Mr. Shipley, I don't know, if the town has a specific.
I mean, we just would need something in writing that where as of a certain reasonable time, it would be brought into compliance. I have no problem with March or later, personally. It's not a problem.
Do you need that from Wade, or do you need that from me, or from the church, or from whom?
Well, I mean, we would need it. I don't know. It just has to be something that would stand, and it will happen. Whether it's the property owner, probably the property owner.
The most logical one would be the property owner for the.
Part of the meeting minutes? Can it not be part of the meeting minutes?
This meeting, we don't control what he does after we leave, so we don't have.
You guys just voted on the minutes from the last meeting.
The minutes we do, but we can't control what he does after we make a decision. So we haven't taken a vote yet.
Enforcement, they don't.
That's correct.
Okay.
I would just need somebody with an official position to put something in writing. As of a certain date, it will be brought into compliance per the action taken by the Board of Zoning Appeals on blah.
Yeah.
And that date,
Probably Board of Trustees.
we can
then
work with them on that
I'm sorry.
date, certainly. That's
That would probably then have to come from our business manager.
okay.
Of the
That
church.
would be fine.
All right. Any further questions of any members of the board, of anyone that we've heard this evening? If not, do we have any motions?
All right, I'll be the one. Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I make a motion that this appeals request be denied.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second. I'll let you second.
I'll second. Thank you.
Do I have any discussion? All right, call for the question. All in favor, please affirm by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. That being the last item on the agenda, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
All right.
All right. Thank you very much. We do wish you well.